March 1945 near the Oder River Eastern Front. The night is absolute. No moon, no stars, just a vast blackness pressing down over a ruined landscape. Somewhere in the frozen fields east of Berlin, a German Panther tank crawls forward with its engine throttled low. Inside the steel hull, the crew can barely breathe from the mixture of oil fumes and cold sweat. Corporal Kurt Brenner, the gunner, peers into a scope glowing faintly green. To his eyes, the darkness outside now blooms with ghostly light trees, ditches, even the silhouette of a Soviet T-34 idling half a kilometer ahead. Brenner whispers to his commander, "I see them." The commander, Lieutenant Hans Fleur, nods, though he can't see anything through the naked eye. Mounted atop the turret, a strange black cylinder hums faintly. The FG-1250 Vampire infrared sight. Its infrared lamp, invisible to humans, floods the battlefield in light that only the scope can see. Outside, the air is silent but alive with tension. The crew knows they were among the first to test this new weapon and experimental system designed by scientists from AEG, the giant German electronics firm. Officially, it's called Infrazielgurt, the infrared targeting device. Unofficially, the men call it Nachtsichtgerät, the night-seeing eye. They've heard rumors that this system came straight from the laboratories of Dr. Ernst Leitz and his colleagues engineers who once built precision optics for Leica cameras, now repurposed for war. The irony isn't lost on anyone. A camera company helping men see in darkness so they can kill more efficiently. The Panther halts. The T-34s are idling on the far side of a frozen road, unaware. Fleur raises his binoculars, but to him, it's still pitch black. "You sure?" he murmurs. "Positive," Brenner replies, adjusting the focus wheel of the Vampire sight. The image sharpens, the Soviet crew stepping down from their tank, a cigarette glowing faintly in one soldier's hand. Through the scope, the ember burns like a tiny sun. The gun recoils. A thunderclap rips the silence. In the distance, a fireball blooms as the T-34 explodes. To the naked eye, it looks like sorcery. Death out of nowhere from a tank firing blind. The Soviets scramble for cover, firing wildly into the dark. The Panther reverses into a copse of trees, vanishing as quietly as it appeared. Inside, the men are half in awe, half in disbelief. "It works," Brenner mutters. Mein Gott, it actually works. For months, German engineers had been promising miracles to a military losing its grip on reality. The Reich was collapsing on every front, its armies retreating, its cities burning. But in secret facilities deep inside Germany, scientists like Leitz and his team still pushed forward with projects meant to defy that collapse. Night vision, jet engines, rockets, even flying bombs. The Vampire system was one of the last born in that frenzy of desperation. Developed under AEG's optical division, it used a 200-watt infrared lamp paired with a scope tuned to invisible light. The beam illuminated targets that could only be seen through the special lens turning night into day for whoever held it. But the system came with problems. It was heavy, cumbersome, and required its own power supply, 2 bulky batteries carried inside the tank. Field testing had begun only months earlier, first on the Sturmgewehr 44 rifles, then on the Panther OSVG tanks assigned to elite units near the Oder. Few crews ever received them. Fewer still survived long enough to report back. The Panther rolls to a halt again. Outside, artillery flashes bloom along the horizon. Berlin is less than 100 kilometers away. The men inside listen to the distant thunder, each wondering if the strange green world in their scopes will make any difference in the end. Brenner wipes condensation from the lens. The glow from the screen bathes his face in eerie light, his eyes hollow, almost inhuman. "Feels like looking through another world," he says softly. Fleur glances over. "A world we're about to lose," he answers. No one speaks again. They continue their patrol until dawn, engaging twice more before retreating. When the Soviets advance later that day, they find empty tanks and discarded equipment among them, a strange device mounted on the turret. It's unlike anything they've ever seen. They send it back to command. Within weeks, word reaches both Soviet and Allied intelligence. The Germans were fighting with night vision. At first, few believe it. American officers examining captured AEG equipment near Leipzig dismiss it as some kind of rangefinder. Only later, when engineers power it on and see the ghostly green image flicker to life, do they realize what they found. What they hold in their hands is not science fiction. It is the first step toward a future of warfare fought without darkness. But this night vision system wasn't the product of a military madman. It came from a scientist who never meant to build a weapon at all. To understand how a peaceful optical engineer became the father of modern night vision, we have to go back a decade before the war. Before the tanks, before the world went dark. Berlin, 1933. The birth of an idea. Berlin hums with electricity. Streetcars clatter past rows of cafes, and radios pour out speeches that sound more like threats than politics. Inside the laboratories of E.G. Allgemeine Elektrizitätsgesellschaft, the air hums with a different kind of energy, curiosity. At a tall wooden workbench cluttered with lenses, glass prisms, and brass fittings, Dr. Ernst Leitz adjusts the focus of an experimental sensor. A faint beam of invisible light, infrared, passes through the darkened room, invisible to the human eye. But on a small cathode screen, a faint shape flickers, a hand, outlined in ghostly white. It's 1933 and Leitz isn't thinking about war. His work, funded through a mix of private industry and academic grants, aims to expand optical physics, to find ways of seeing beyond the visible spectrum. For years, German scientists have led the world in precision optics. Carl Zeiss, Leica, and AEG are household names in engineering circles. Leitz himself, once a consultant for the Leitz Camera Company in Wetzlar, has spent his career refining photographic lenses and optical instruments. But infrared, that's something new. Infrared light had been discovered long before, back in 1800, but only recently have engineers begun to find ways to harness it. For Leitz, the appeal isn't military. It's scientific. Imagine, he tells his colleagues, being able to see in total darkness. Imagine measuring heat without touching an object. Imagine navigation without light. No one in that lab could have guessed that, within a decade, that same curiosity would be used to fight the darkest war in human history. By the late 1930s, Germany's direction shifts from research to rearmament. Under the Nazi regime, science and engineering are nationalized. Innovation becomes a tool of ideology. AEG, Siemens, Telefunken, all are pressured to align their research with the needs of the Wehrmacht. Leitz's lab is no exception. The company's optical division is instructed to focus on Nachtsigergate, night-seeing devices. The official purpose is defensive, allowing anti-aircraft batteries to detect enemy bombers during night raids. But the scope of the project grows fast. Military officers visit the lab more frequently. Engineers are given uniforms, ranks, and secrecy orders. Leitz, who once published freely in scientific journals, now finds his research restricted behind locked doors. Still, the intellectual challenge fascinates him. "We are learning to see what no man has seen before," one of his assistants writes in a private notebook. Light, invisible but real, the ghosts of physics. The first major breakthrough comes in 1936, when Leitz and his small team at AEG successfully design a working infrared lamp and receiver system. Using lead sulfide photocells, sensitive to wavelengths beyond visible light, they manage to detect the heat signature of a candle flame through total darkness. The Wehrmacht takes notice. Within months, funding pours in. What began as an experiment in optics becomes part of a classified military program known as Infrarotbeleucht infrared illumination. By 1939, when German troops march into Poland, Leitz's technology has already been quietly adapted for field trials. Small infrared scopes are tested on stationary weapons, anti-tank guns, machine guns, and early searchlight guidance systems. None of it works well yet. The power requirements are enormous. The lenses fog easily. The images are dim and distorted. But the results are enough to convince the military that the idea holds promise. As the war expands, Leitz's role becomes increasingly conflicted. He is not a Nazi party member, nor is he an outspoken opponent. Like many scientists in the Reich, he finds himself trapped in the system, working under orders, trying to keep his research alive while avoiding political scrutiny. In 1940, a Luftwaffe liaison officer visits the lab and delivers a message. Berlin requests application for armored vehicles. The order is clear. The army wants a device that can help tank crews see and aim in the dark. It sounds absurd. AEG's infrared systems require massive generators, delicate optics, and bulky cooling units. Mounting such equipment on a moving tank seems impossible. But impossible is not a word the Nazi high command accepts. Under Albert Speer's armaments program, Germany is obsessed with Wunderwaffen, miracle weapons that might reverse the course of war through technology. The V-2 rocket, the Me-262 jet, the guided bomb, all emerge from this same atmosphere of frantic innovation. And so, in a dim laboratory on the outskirts of Berlin, Leitz's team begins sketching the early designs for what would become the FG-1250 Vampire system, the world as first operational night vision sight for tanks. Outside the lab, the war consumes Europe. Air raid sirens wail nightly, Allied bombers turned German cities into infernos. Still, the experiments continue underground, in cellars and tunnels reinforced with concrete. In 1942, a prototype is finally mounted on a modified Panther tank turret at the Kammersdorf Proving Ground south of Berlin. Soldiers gather in the freezing dark as Leitz and his engineers power on the infrared lamp. Through the scope, the pitch-black field transforms into a pale, ghostly landscape. Men become silhouettes. Vehicles glow faintly. It works imperfectly, but undeniably. One observer writes later, "It was as if the darkness had been peeled away. I could see men walking in fields where, a moment before, there had been nothing." Leitz watches quietly, hands clasped behind his back. For him, the moment is one of triumph and dread. The scientist in him marvels at what human ingenuity has achieved. The man in him wonders what it will be used for. By 1943, the Wehrmacht orders limited production. Only a handful of units will ever be built, too costly, too complex for mass deployment. But in the coming months, as Germany's situation worsens, that will change. The darkness that once inspired discovery is about to become a battlefield. Berlin, 1941 to 1943. Science in the shadow of power winter settles over Berlin with a sharp, metallic chill. Snow drifts along Unter den Linden as blackout curtains cover every window. The city still glows faintly, not from lights but from ambition. Inside the ministries and armament offices, a new kind of warfare is taking shape. The Reich dreams of machines that will conquer nature itself, rockets that reach London, jets faster than any Allied plane, bombs guided by radio waves, and now eyes that pierce the night. In this race for technological dominance, Dr. Ernst Leitz and his colleagues at AEG find themselves swept into the vortex. What began as scientific curiosity has become a state mandate. Infrared research is now a military secret, its purpose dictated by the Waffenamt, Germany's weapons development office. Leitz's laboratory on Ackerstraße operates under constant watch. The corridors are filled with uniformed officers, not scientists. On the walls hang blueprints stamped Geheim Top Secret. Even the assistants are vetted by the Gestapo. In this new world, a misplaced word can cost a career or a life. The scientists continue their work, speaking softly, moving carefully. They build devices that no one outside their lab can even name. By 1941, as the war stretches eastward into the Soviet Union, the Wehrmacht faces a new kind of challenge: endless terrain and endless night. Tank divisions that once rolled through France in daylight now slog through forests and snowstorms that stretch for hundreds of miles. Commanders begin requesting technology to fight under low visibility, systems that can help tanks and infantry navigate or target without light. The military term is Nachtsichtfähigkeit, night fighting capability. Leitz's infrared optics suddenly move from curiosity to priority. At the AEG plant in Berlin-Reinickendorf, production teams start assembling the first field-ready infrared illuminators. Powerful searchlights paired with image converters. Early versions are mounted on trucks and flak batteries. Their glow is invisible to the naked eye, but, when paired with a viewing scope, can reveal bombers at altitude. The results astonish observers. The devices don't replace radar, but they offer something different: sight, without illumination. For the first time, a soldier can see in total darkness. Still, the equipment remains too large for mobile use. Each lamp needs its own generator, its own cooling system. Leitz continues to refine the design, searching for a smaller power source, lighter optics, better image clarity. One surviving lab note reads, "The human eye is bound by nature. Technology can free it, if power and precision can be mastered." That pursuit of mastery grows darker as the war intensifies. In 1942, Albert Speer is appointed Minister of Armaments, and his regime of efficiency transforms the German war machine. Speer's philosophy is simple: total mobilization through science. He visits AEG's facilities in person, accompanied by SS officers and engineers from Zeiss and Telefunken. The meeting lasts hours. When it ends, the message is clear: the Reich wants results, quickly. Leitz is instructed to prioritize the Panther project. The goal: create an infrared sight compact enough for the Panther OSF G main battle tank. The device must function in real combat, under vibration, cold, and shock. The challenge borders on impossible. The optical tubes fog in seconds. The lenses crack from recoil. The electronic amplifiers overheat. Yet month by month, the prototypes improve. By mid-1943, the team has a working concept: a Vampirgurt, or vampire device. The name is an engineer's joke. It sees in darkness, drinks electricity, and leaves no trace of light. While the engineers battle physics, Germany battles reality. The war has turned. In July 1943, Allied bombers devastate Hamburg during Operation Gomorrah, killing tens of thousands. At the same time, the Red Army halts the Wehrmacht at Kursk, in the largest tank battle in history. For the first time, German officers admit what they had whispered for months. The Reich is no longer advancing, it's defending. Desperation fuels innovation. Speer doubles funding for experimental projects. Infrared research expands to include portable scopes for snipers and night vision devices for the Sturmgewehr 44, the new automatic rifle. Leitz oversees the scientific side, but military engineers handle field testing. Small groups of Waffen-SS soldiers receive early versions for evaluation. Reports trickle back. The devices work, but only under perfect conditions. Batteries die within minutes. The lamps expose their position if viewed through captured Allied sensors. Still, the Wehrmacht presses on. The idea of owning the night, of fighting while the enemy gropes blind, is too seductive to abandon. In the quiet hours of his lab, Leitz sometimes pauses to read the letters that slip past sensors, messages from colleagues drafted into the army, from friends lost in air raids. He doesn't speak of them, but the fatigue shows in his face. His assistant later recalled, he would stand by the window after curfew, watching the dark sky. He once said, "If only we could use this gift to find our way, not to destroy." But the Reich doesn't deal in gifts, only weapons. By the end of 1943, the first prototype of the FG-1250 is ready. A compact infrared lamp mounted on a steel frame, paired with a sight that converts invisible light into a pale, greenish image. It is crude, fragile, but it works. At Kammersdorf, military observers gather as a Panther tank rolls out at night. The driver navigates without headlights. The gunner locks onto a target unseen by the naked eye. A shell slams into the bullseye. The officers applaud. The scientists exhale. The future of night warfare has just flickered to life. For Leitz, it's a moment of vindication and foreboding. The world is learning to see in darkness. And soon, that darkness will no longer hide anyone. Germany, 1943 to 1944, building eyes for the night. The sound of hammers and turbines fills the AEG assembly plant outside Berlin-Reinickendorf. It's 1944, and the air smells of oil, solder, and desperation. Allied bombers have turned much of Germany into rubble. Yet inside these fortified workshops, engineers and machinists work under flickering lights to build something new. A device meant to give the Reich back the night. In a sealed chamber, Dr. Ernst Leitz bends over a workbench cluttered with brass casings and glass tubes. The prototype before him is small, barely the length of a man's forearm, but heavy with promise. It's labeled FG-1250 Vampogert, serial number 001. Leitz turns a dial. The vacuum tube hums softly, then glows faintly green. On a small cathode screen, a dark blur comes into focus. The outline of a soldier standing across the room. Illuminated not by light, but by infrared radiation invisible to human eyes. He exhales. It works. The Vampire system consists of 3 core components. A scope that translates invisible light into a visible image. A lamp that emits a focused infrared beam. And a power unit that feeds both with energy from large 12-volt batteries. When combined, they grant sight where no light exists, but at a cost. The batteries are bulky, the optics delicate, and the entire setup heavy enough to strain the turret of a Panther tank. The engineers know the concept is fragile, but in the closing months of 1943, fragility doesn't matter. Germany needs miracles. Field tests begin in early 1944 at Kammersdorf and Stahlwerk Unterley, Asset, where select crews from the Panzer Lehr Division are summoned to test the experimental night-fighting Panther. Among the observers is a major from the Waffenamt, clipboard in hand, watching through binoculars as the tanks disappear into the Black Forest. Moments later, green-tinted scopes reveal silhouettes moving silently through the trees, soldiers, trucks, obstacles. A flash, a thunderclap, and a target vehicle erupts in flames. The onlookers cheer. In the field log, the officer writes, "Operation successful. Targets engaged without visible light. System effective at 600 meters. For the first time in human history, a tank has fought in complete darkness." But perfection remains elusive. Each unit must be hand-built, assembled with microscopic precision. Every lens must be ground, every filament tuned. The lead sulfide sensors burn out quickly under high current. The power packs, roughly the size of a car battery, drain in less than 20 minutes of continuous use. Leitz's engineers experiment with lighter components, adjusting wavelength filters, testing new cathodes. Progress is slow. In February 1944, Allied bombers flattened part of the AEG complex, killing several technicians and destroying weeks of data. Leitz relocates his operations underground, working by candlelight and generator. By mid-year, 5 functional prototypes exist. Each is immediately assigned to frontline testing, 1 to the Eastern Front, 2 to the Western, and 2 retained for training. Every report that filters back through the chaos of the war tells the same story. When the system works, it's astonishing. But it's too complex, too fragile, and far too late. Meanwhile, the German war machine begins to collapse under its own weight. The Wehrmacht retreats across Europe. Allied bombing raids strike day and night. Inside the laboratories, Leitz feels the pressure tightening like a vice. Military officers now demand results measured not in months, but in weeks. One day, in the spring of 1944, an SS technical officer confronts him over production delays. "You were once proud to make cameras for the world," the officer sneers. "Now your eyes are for us. Do not fail the Führer?" Leitz doesn't answer. He's no longer a man of ideology, just a scientist trying to survive his own creation. The Vampire works, but he knows it won't save Germany. At the Peenemünde Army Research Center, rocket scientists under Werner von Braun are testing the V-2. In Bavaria, Messerschmitt engineers race to finish the Me-262 jet. And across the Reich, every laboratory echoes the same refrain. One more breakthrough. One more chance. Leitz's work is classified under the same program, Wunderwaffe, the miracle weapons. To the propaganda ministry, these projects are proof of German genius. To the engineers, they are a final, frantic gamble. Still, Leitz pushes ahead. Late that summer, his team achieves a key breakthrough, a refined infrared lamp using a quartz bulb and a parabolic reflector, cutting power consumption by nearly half. The new system, combined with a lighter scope, finally makes the device feasible for mass production, at least in theory. He names the final iteration Vampire FG-1250B, compact, deadly, functional. By September 1944, the first operational Panthers equipped with the system, known as AHU units, are dispatched to the Eastern Front. Their mission: to conduct reconnaissance and ambush operations under cover of night. Each Panther carries its own infrared headlamp and a second vehicle equipped with a larger AHU spotlight, a 60-centimeter lamp mounted on a half-track that projects an invisible beam for the tanks to use. Together, they move like hunters through the darkness. Soldiers in these units are astonished by what they see. A surviving report from the 1st Panzer Division reads, "Visibility beyond expectation. Enemy tanks appear bright, even at 700 meters. Engagement possible without headlights. But such success comes too late. The Reich is burning. The Soviets push west. The Allies cross the Rhine. Factories crumble under bombs. AEG's final shipments of Vampire devices never reach their destinations. By winter, Berlin itself is a city of shadows." Leitz walks the corridors of the half-empty lab one last time. Crates of unfinished optics line the walls. The sound of distant artillery shakes the glass. He had wanted to give sight to humanity, to explore the unseen spectrum. Instead, he has built a weapon for a dying empire. The irony is not lost on him. The world's first night vision system, born from scientific wonder, will see its first combat in the twilight of the Third Reich. And as Germany's nights grow darker, its tanks will fight their final battles under the glow of invisible light. Night, December 1944. Somewhere near Lake Balaton, Hungary. The air was still, sharp, and unnaturally quiet. The last snowflakes of the year clung to the frozen ruts of the muddy road. In the distance, a Soviet T-34 engine rumbled, a deep, metallic growl echoing through the dark. Inside a Panther Osv. G tank, 5 men waited. The commander, Lieutenant Karl-Heinz Wegener, leaned close to the new infrared viewing scope mounted in front of him. The device emitted no visible light, only a faint hum from the heavy power supply strapped behind his seat. He looked through the eyepiece and froze. "Scheig. I can see them." In the eerie, grainy monochrome glow, a convoy of T-34s appeared as pale silhouettes creeping across the snowy field, unaware they were being watched. To the crew, it felt supernatural. They were seeing the invisible. The FG-1250 Vampire infrared system turned the night into a ghostly theater of shapes and movement. Each tank carried an infrared searchlight mounted on the turret, paired with an image converter scope in the commander's position. The infrared beam was invisible to the naked eye but could be seen through the scope, revealing targets hundreds of meters away. The system was revolutionary, but primitive. The infrared lamp's battery weighed nearly 30 kilograms and lasted only 20 minutes at full power. The image was grainy and narrow, like looking through a tunnel of mist. Still, in 1944, it was something no other army possessed. AEC engineers called it Naxikert FG-1250. The soldiers just called it Vampire, the vampire, because it drank electricity and hunted in the dark. That night, Wegener's platoon advanced under cover of complete darkness. The Soviet lines were asleep, confident that no attack could come before dawn. The Panther's main guns swiveled slowly. Through the infrared scope, Wegener could see a T-34 parked behind a hay barn. He adjusted the crosshair, whispered a command, and boom! The first shell hit home. The barn erupted in flame. In that moment, the night vision turned the battlefield into something surreal, greenish shadows. Sudden bursts of fire, figures running like ghosts across the snow. The Panther's gun fired again. They thought we were the devil himself, a gunner recalled years later in an Allied interrogation file. They fired everywhere, but they couldn't see us. But the Vampire's effectiveness was short-lived. The system required immense logistical support, spare batteries, delicate optics, trained operators. Most German units didn't even know the technology existed. By early 1945, fewer than 60 Panthers were equipped with infrared systems. Still, word spread fast through the ranks. Stories circulated among Allied troops about German ghost tanks attacking in total darkness. Soviet soldiers spoke of steel beasts with burning eyes. The effect was psychological as much as tactical. The mere rumor of invisible tanks made soldiers light torches or fire blindly into the dark, betraying their positions. Meanwhile, at AEG's laboratory in Berlin-Treptow, Dr. Leitz and his engineers worked feverishly to miniaturize the technology. Their dream was to create a portable infantry version, a night vision rifle scope for soldiers on foot. By November 1944, they had succeeded. The device, the ZG-1229 Vampire, could be mounted on a Sturmgewehr 44 ZAS TG-44 rifle. It came with a small infrared lamp attached above the barrel and a battery pack worn on the soldier's back. Each system cost as much as a small car. Only a few dozen were ever fielded. But those who used it swore by its power. In February 1945, a Waffensis unit near the Oder River was equipped with the ZG-1229. American troops later found a few of the strange devices abandoned in a bunker still, connected to their heavy power packs. When U.S. engineers examined them, they could hardly believe what they were seeing. The concept of infrared combat vision was still theoretical in the United States. Yet here it was tested, functional, and deadly. The device appeared to allow visual observation in total darkness, noted a declassified 1946 U.S. Army technical report. We were astonished such a weapon existed, but in the end, it was too late for Germany. The war was collapsing faster than technology could catch up. Factories were bombed. Supply lines shattered. AEG's infrared division was evacuated to avoid Soviet capture. Dr. Leitz himself fled Berlin in April 1945, carrying only a briefcase of blueprints and a battered prototype. The Third Reich had created night vision, but it would be the Allies who perfected it. As the sun rose over the ruins of the Eastern Front, the last operational Vampire Panthers stood silent, their optics covered in frost. The power cells were dead. The crews were gone. All that remained were the machines and the strange glowing eyes that had once turned night into day. By the time the Allies reached Berlin, the world's first night vision technology lay buried in the rubble. But in those last nights of the war, the German army had glimpsed a future no one else could see. The city was dying. Every night, Allied bombers reduced another square mile to ash. The streets were littered with twisted tram rails, charred paper, and the faint sour smell of burning insulation. Inside the AEG research complex at Treptow, the scientists worked by candlelight, the windows blacked out, the floors shaking from distant explosions. Dr. Ernst Leitz sat hunched over his desk, his fingers trembling as he tightened the lens mount of a final prototype infrared viewer. His team was exhausted. Engineers sleeping beside their instruments, technicians taking turns pedaling a bicycle generator to power the oscilloscope. They all knew the end was near. But Leitz couldn't stop. "This isn't for the Reich anymore," he told one of his assistants quietly. "This is for the future. Whoever survives next will need to see in the dark." The fall of order by March, the Reich's industrial network had collapsed into chaos. The ministries no longer issued orders, they begged. The Wehrmacht as Weapons Bureau, Heereswaffenamt, sent frantic telegrams demanding night vision sets for the Panther tanks defending Berlin. But there were no more copper coils, no more precision glass, no trains left to deliver anything. At AEG, shipments of materials arrived riddled with bullet holes. One crate marked optical components turned out to be full of firewood. And yet, Lisa's men kept working. They dismantled laboratory instruments to salvage wires. They melted old oscilloscope screens to make new lenses. They even scavenged from destroyed hospitals, taking surgical lights and X-ray tubes to use as test components. The research had become a survival mission. Operation Licht, the last experiment. In March 1945, a small team of engineers gathered in a basement room deep beneath the Treptow complex. Leitz called it Operation Licht, light. The plan was simple: test the smallest, most compact infrared scope ever built, one that could fit inside a pocket and run on a handheld power cell. It wasn't a weapon anymore, it was a proof of concept. For a brief moment, the prototype worked. A soft, ghostly image appeared on the monitor, a man's face, illuminated by an invisible beam. Then the generator failed. The screen went black. Leitz shut it down and stared at the darkness for a long time. "We're too early," he whispered. "But someone will finish it." The escape by April 1945, Soviet artillery was already audible from the outskirts of Berlin. The AEG complex stood directly in the path of the advancing Red Army. The Wehrmacht ordered all scientific personnel to evacuate or destroy sensitive materials. That night, Leitz and 3 assistants loaded their remaining research, a few crates of optical parts, schematics and notebooks, onto an old Opel Blitz truck. The headlights were off. Only the faint red glow of a cigarette flickered in the cab. They drove through the ruins of Berlin under curfew, guided by the sound of distant gunfire and the eerie green glimmer from the test scope on the dashboard. The convoy's destination, Heidenheim in southern Germany, where another AEG branch still operated in secret. But they never made it that far. Near Leipzig, their truck was stopped by a Waffen-SS patrol. The officer demanded to know their cargo. When he saw the strange optical devices, he accused them of sabotage. "Black technology," he called it. Leitz tried to explain. He showed the officer the infrared scope, held it up, and told him, "It helps us see the enemy at night." The officer laughed. "At night? There's nothing left to see." He confiscated half the crates and drove away. Leitz never saw them again. American intelligence arrives 3 weeks later. When U.S. forces entered the region, they found the remnants of AEG's research scattered across factories and bunkers. In one underground lab near Munich, an OSS, Office of Strategic Services team, discovered a set of infrared scopes wrapped in paper marked Vampire. The lead intelligence officer, Captain Robert L. Dixon, wrote in his field notes, "We have in our possession several optical electric devices apparently intended for night use. The design is unlike anything produced in the US. It appears the Germans have developed portable infrared viewing systems." The OSS quickly classified the find. Within weeks, the equipment was shipped to Aberdeen Proving Ground in Maryland for study. The Americans were stunned. They'd seen radar, V-2 rockets, jet aircraft, but this was different. This was the beginning of something invisible. The end of the scientist. Dr. Leitz never made it to the Americans. Soviet troops reached his convoy near Dresden in late April 1945. According to Soviet interrogation records, later recovered, he was captured and brought to Moscow to assist in optical research for the benefit of the Soviet Union. He was never seen again. But his notebooks survived, copies of which ended up in both American and British archives after the war. His drawings of infrared imaging tubes, wavelength filters, and miniature amplifiers would quietly influence generations of engineers. The war's last night, on the night of April 29, 1945, the last Panther tanks equipped with FG-1250 systems fought outside Berlin. A young lieutenant wrote in his final diary entry, "We can still see them in the dark. But we have no shells left." By dawn, the tank was destroyed. The infrared lamp shattered, the cables burned. When Soviet soldiers entered the wreckage, they found the strange lens still mounted on the turret, a relic of a future war. In those final weeks, the German war machine had turned into a museum of miracles, jets, rockets, guided missiles, and night vision. But none of it could stop what was coming. The war was over. The technology survived. The war in Europe had ended. But in the basements, hangars, and half-collapsed factories of the defeated Reich, another kind of battle had just begun. One fought not with guns, but with clipboards, crates, and secrecy. The American, British, and Soviet armies were racing to seize what remained of Germany's scientific empire. Every laboratory was a potential treasure chest, full of blueprints, prototypes and mines that could shape the next war before this one had even cooled. Among those treasures was something few could understand. A box labeled Infraratzielgerät FG-1250. To the untrained eye, it was just a scope, a battery pack, a tangle of cables, and a heavy lamp with black glass. But when American engineers powered it up, the world turned ghostly green. It was like stepping into science fiction, one U.S. officer later recalled. We could see men walking in the dark, their helmets glowing like fireflies. It was eerie as hell. The American find at a captured AEG warehouse near Leipzig. U.S. Army technical intelligence teams discovered dozens of infrared lamps and gun-mounted scopes stacked in crates. Many still carried the Waffenamt Eagle, proof they'd been destined for the front lines before the war collapsed. One team leader, Major Paul Nair, remembered thinking the equipment was years ahead of anything in Allied development. In the United States, infrared work had been confined to laboratories and range tests, never to the battlefield. The U.S. Army Signal Corps immediately shipped samples to Fort Monmouth, New Jersey, for evaluation. There, engineers from RCA and General Electric were stunned to see that the German system worked crude but functional, running on principles that American scientists had theorized but never built at scale. The Vampir's viewing tube, a cathode ray intensifier, was a revelation. Its heart was a small photosensitive layer that converted invisible infrared light into visible photons. What had been a black void became a living image. The Americans began referring to it as electronic night vision, Operation Paperclip, and the hunt for brains. By the summer of 1945, the U.S. military had launched Operation Paperclip, a covert effort to bring German scientists to America before the Soviets could reach them. Most of the world knows it for rocket men like Wernher von Braun, but among the hundreds of names on the list were also physicists, chemists, and optical engineers connected to AEG, Carl Zeiss, and Leitz. In one declassified memo dated June 1945, a Signal Corps officer wrote, "Priority should be given to locating individuals connected with night vision development. German work in this field has immediate military potential." Through Paperclip, fragments of the Vampire project, from engineers to equipment, found their way into U.S. Army laboratories by late 1946. There, they inspired the first generation of American night vision scopes, codenamed Sniperscope and Snooperscope. These early devices would be carried by U.S. Marines during the Korean War, descendants, in form and spirit, of the German original, the Soviet Shadow. But the Americans weren't alone. To the east, Soviet military engineers had been just as busy stripping Germany of its scientific spoils. At AEG's Treptow complex, Leitz's former laboratory, Red Army officers ordered everything dismantled and shipped to Moscow. Dozens of optical technicians were invited to work in Soviet institutes. There, under tight secrecy, they rebuilt and modified the German infrared systems. By 1948, the Soviets had their own field-tested versions mounted on T-54 tanks. Declassified Soviet reports later described the AEG devices as the technological basis of our night vision program. The Cold War had barely begun, but already, both superpowers were inheriting the same ghost from Hitler's laboratories. The British connection. Meanwhile, British intelligence, through the Combined Intelligence Objectives Subcommittee, COS, had captured a handful of smaller AEG facilities in northern Germany. In a 1945 CIOS report, investigators wrote, "It is the opinion of this team that German progress in active infrared is far beyond any comparable British development." The British shipped several complete Vampire units to Wembley Technical Laboratories for analysis. By 1947, this research directly contributed to the first active night sights used on British Centurion tanks. To the public, these advances would remain secret for decades. The scientists who stayed behind, for those who hadn't escaped or been recruited, life under occupation was far less glamorous. Dozens of optical engineers from Jena, Wetzlar, and Berlin found themselves unemployed, interrogated, or quietly absorbed into post-war civilian industries. Some returned to making cameras and microscopes, the very work they'd done before the war. A few even joined Leeds Camera GmbH again, now under Allied supervision, rebuilding the Leica brand from ruins. Ironically, the same optical precision that had once guided a Panther tank gun now helped capture wedding portraits and street photographs in the 1950s. The man who had once built instruments to see in the dark was now building tools to preserve light. The technology's echo by 1949. US and British prototypes derived from German research were already in testing. The American MPAS-4 and M1 sniperscope systems, both developed for infantry use, shared unmistakable DNA with the Vampire. Heavy, battery-powered infrared beam devices that turn night into a dim green haze. In one military report, a U.S. colonel wrote, "We may owe our next war's tactics to a technology the Germans barely had time to use." In a grim twist of history, the work of scientists who tried to end the darkness for their soldiers would soon define how darkness itself became a weapon in Korea, Vietnam, and beyond. The unspoken race while the public celebrated peace, another war had quietly begun, a war for vision. From Moscow to Washington, secret labs buzzed with German-inspired innovation. Infrared turned into image intensifiers, then passive light amplifiers, then thermal imaging. The seed planted in a dying empire's last days was now growing into the eyes of the Cold War. And yet, almost no one outside those walls knew the name Ernst Leitz, or the role his optics played in shaping a century. Within 5 years of the war's end, American soldiers were using infrared night sights in combat, built from German blueprints. The men who first saw the world in green had vanished into history. But their invention would never disappear again. Snow falls softly over the ridgelines, turning the night into a blank page. To the naked eye, the battlefield is pure silence and shadow, but through the new American sniperscope, the world shimmers in phosphor green. A U.S. Army rifleman peers through the device, his helmet barely visible under the faint glow of the scope's power pack. Downrange, a figure moves. One squeeze of the trigger, and the flash of light breaks the dark. It has the same principle that guided German tank gunners 6 years earlier, the same invisible beam, the same eerie glow, only now it carries a new flag. A technology reborn, the Korean War became the first conflict where night vision truly changed the way soldiers fought. American troops used the M3 carbine sniper scope, a descendant of the German Vampir FG-1250. The weapon-mounted infrared lamp illuminated targets that only the scope could see. Enemy soldiers, unaware they were being watched through invisible light, called it ghost fire. Reports from the field described the same strange sensation German soldiers once felt, seeing a living, breathing world that others couldn't. You could see their breath in the cold, one U.S. veteran remembered. They had no idea we were there, but despite its advantage, the sniper scope was far from perfect. The infrared lamp made soldiers vulnerable to anyone else using the same technology, and it required massive battery packs. It was progress, but not perfection. Still, it marked the birth of a new kind of battlefield, one where the line between day and night began to blur. The science of seeing in the dark throughout the 1950s. Research into electro-optical imaging exploded across the Cold War world. In the United States, companies like RCA, Westinghouse, and Texas Instruments poured millions into developing smaller, lighter, and more sensitive image tubes. The goal: eliminate the need for infrared lamps altogether by amplifying ambient starlight. This was the second generation of night vision, what scientists called passive systems. It relied on a discovery originally hinted at by the same German engineers who built the Vampir, that electrons could be multiplied inside a vacuum tube, making faint light visible without infrared projection. The physics was elegant, but the race was ruthless. Every advance promised not just better cameras but better weapons. The Soviets followed close behind, testing their own passive scopes by the late 1950s. By then, both superpowers had learned the same lesson: whoever controlled the night controlled the battlefield. The secret eyes of the Cold War, the shadow world of espionage, also embraced this new vision. U.S. intelligence agencies, first the OSS's successor, the CIA, then the NSA, began using low-light imaging for surveillance and reconnaissance. Night vision cameras appeared on U-2 spy planes, reconnaissance drones, and border outposts along the Iron Curtain. The Soviets, in turn, used portable night vision binoculars in East Berlin, patrolling checkpoints where defection attempts were frequent. Invisible light had become a silent language between empires, a way to see without being seen. And behind every image, somewhere in the chain of technology, was a fingerprint left by German optics. From weapons to watches, by the early 1960s, night vision had quietly migrated beyond the battlefield. Police departments began using handheld infrared cameras for search and rescue. Wildlife researchers used them to study nocturnal animals without disturbance. Even television engineers experimented with infrared-sensitive cameras for low-light broadcasting. In 1964, an article in Popular Mechanics called Night Vision the greatest gift of the war to modern science. What it didn't say was where that gift truly came from. Few readers realized that the technology that now allowed American families to watch TV in dim living rooms had first been tested on a frozen road near the Oder River, inside a German tank at the end of the world. The forgotten scientist by this time, the name Ernst Leitz had faded into obscurity. Official records listed him as presumed deceased after 1945. His pre-war contributions to Leica remain known among photographers, but his wartime research, classified by both the Soviets and the Allies, vanished into archives. In Wetzlar, West Germany, the Leica company rebuilt itself into a symbol of post-war artistry and precision. Tourists who visited the factory saw only the clean, bright laboratories where technicians assembled cameras. No one mentioned that these same benches had once produced optical gun sights and infrared lenses for tanks. History, it seemed, preferred light to shadow. The legacy nitrogen monoxide, one claimed by the late 1960s, the U.S. Army had developed third-generation image intensifiers compact, battery-efficient, capable of turning starlight into daylight. Soldiers in Vietnam carried them through jungles, unaware that their starlight scopes traced their lineage to a war most of them were too young to remember. One Army engineer at Fort Beaver reportedly kept a fragment of a German vampire tube on his desk. He'd found it in a warehouse years earlier. When asked why he kept it, he said simply, "It's where it all began." The moral mirror. As the Cold War deepened, the duality of the invention became clear. Night vision saved lives, rescuing soldiers, detecting ambush, reducing civilian casualties. But it also made killing more efficient, more detached. A technology born from desperation had become an instrument of control, a symbol of how easily science could serve both humanity and horror. When modern historians trace the lineage of night vision devices, they often stop at the American breakthroughs of the 1950s. But those who dig deeper find a trail that leads back to a ruined laboratory in Berlin, and a man who once said, "Whoever survives next will need to see in the dark." In the quiet of the Cold War, night vision turned from a weapon of survival into a way of life. Cities glowed. Soldiers no longer feared the dark. And a forgotten German scientist's final experiment became one of the most transformative inventions of the 20th century. A winter dawn breaks over Berlin. The city hums with life. Trams clatter over tracks rebuilt from rubble, and sunlight glints off the glass facades of modern offices. Yet in a quiet museum tucked behind the city's more famous war memorials, a display tells a different story. Inside a glass case sits a small, unassuming lens assembly, a fragment of a Vampire FG-1250 scope. Its brass casing is worn, its wires frayed, but the green glowing cathode inside hints at the invisible light it once produced. The placard reads simply, "Infrared Tank Sight, Germany, 1944. Developed under Dr. Ernst Leitz." For decades, the story of night vision had been told through the lens of American and Soviet innovation. Few remembered the scientist in Berlin who first glimpsed the possibilities of seeing in darkness, or the desperate war that gave birth to his creation. From the 1970s onward, night vision evolved rapidly. Image intensifiers shrank from bulky devices the size of backpacks to helmet-mounted monoculars. Thermal imaging replaced active infrared lamps, allowing soldiers to detect heat signatures without giving away their own positions. Today, infrared and thermal technologies are ubiquitous. Military. Modern armies deploy night vision goggles, drones, and scopes with capabilities Leitz could only imagine. Civilian. Firefighters scan burning buildings. Wildlife photographers track nocturnal species, and security personnel monitor city streets unseen. Scientific. Astronomers use infrared sensors to map galaxies, while engineers employ thermal cameras to inspect critical infrastructure. In every case, the principle is the same: converting invisible energy into visible information. And at the origin of this technological tree lies a small, green-lit world in a German tank nearly 80 years ago. It wasn't until the 1990s that historians began to fully acknowledge the role of Dr. Ernst Leitz and AEG engineers in the history of night vision. Previously, accounts emphasized American innovations in Korea and Vietnam, or Soviet adaptations during the early Cold War, but archival research uncovered documents, laboratory notes, and surviving prototypes pointing to a far earlier beginning. One historian, writing in the Journal of Military History in 1997, noted, "The German experiments with active infrared devices represent a technological threshold." While their impact on the outcome of World War II was negligible, the conceptual breakthrough directly influenced post-war night vision programs across the globe. For Leitz, this was a posthumous recognition. Captured in 1945, presumed dead in Moscow, he never saw his invention transform battlefields, save lives, or advance science. Yet, his fingerprints endure in every green-tinted display of the night. The story of the Vampire system is more than a tale of optics and electronics. It raises profound ethical questions. Leitz, like many German scientists, worked under a regime committing atrocities. He sought to create technology that could protect soldiers and perhaps tip the balance of war, but in service of a collapsing empire. After the war, his work became the foundation of instruments that would save lives and enhance security. But the same technology made killing more efficient, invisible, and detached from human perception. In this duality, the vampire system exemplifies the moral ambiguity of invention, the line between defense and destruction, between vision and domination. Today, museums, military historians, and optical engineers honor the origins of night vision. At Fort Beaver, Virginia, one can examine early use adaptations of the German vampire scopes, alongside notes from American engineers who studied them after 1945. At the Deutsches Technikmuseum in Berlin, a restored Panther tank displays the FG-1250 in its turret, the eerie green glow recreated with safe modern electronics. The captions emphasize both the ingenuity and the tragedy of its creation. A war-ravaged country producing miracles too late, for a war already lost. Night vision today goes far beyond anything Leeds could have imagined. Thermal imaging satellites orbit the Earth, drones patrol the night sky, and law enforcement uses infrared cameras for search and rescue missions in total darkness. Yet the lesson of the vampire endures. Technology does not exist in a vacuum. Every invention carries a shadow of human intent, historical context, and moral consequence. Military officers, engineers, and historians alike still study the FG-1250, not only as a milestone in optical engineering but as a cautionary tale of how brilliance can be harnessed in the service of destruction or life.